Welcome everybody. I'm very excited today. Love doing these webinar circuits, love teaching. I'm going to kick it off real quick with an intro so you know who you're speaking with and then what we're going to cover today. So in way of a quick intro, my name is Christian Hyatt. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Risk 360. The reason I am relevant to you today is because we've done the first batch of ISO 42001 implementations over the last year. I think Risk 360 has probably done more than anyone else in the globe at this point. So I think we have some standing to just let you guys know how these certifications are going, what we're seeing out in the real world, and what the certification process is really looking like. We also partner very closely with some of the biggest audit firms, some of the biggest external audit firms. So we're developing thought leadership with them, doing talks. We're kind of collaborating on best practices in real time because AI and ISO 42001 is an emerging topic. So the bottom line is I think I'm very plugged in to the overall ecosystem when it comes to AI and ISO 42001 and have some standing to be able to talk about that and share some lessons. So that's a little bit about me. Risk 360, the company that I work for, and founded. Broadly, we do audits and implementations and compliance services. So sometimes we are the external auditor, but more often than not, we're the consulting firm. So we do see both sides of the table where we're the auditor or where we're the consulting firm for different clients because you have to be independent. We also have a GRC platform that we have built and many of our customers use to manage their whole security and compliance program and now AI risk management programs. And then we do offensive security with our motto where we do attack surface management, pen testing, continuous testing. So that's kind of Risk 360, broad strokes, who we are. Okay, that's enough about me. So let me hop in here and talk about you guys and the learning objectives, what we want to kind of cover off on. And the agenda. So in way of learning objectives, I want to be very targeted here as we go through because there are a couple of things I want you guys to be able to walk away with. Number one is just understanding like what is the emerging business case for organizations getting ISO 42001. So maybe your company is already considering it, or maybe you're trying to get ahead of it and you think they are. So we'll talk about those business cases. Why are companies choosing to go down this path of certification? And I want you to be able to speak really intelligently to the framework itself to understand the concepts. I'm going to give you the implementation process so you can speak to that. The certification process so that if you want to go and do all this, you know exactly how that should work. And then I'm also going to dive into some real world applicability so that not only do you understand the concepts, that you also see how that's playing out in the real world. And that plays exactly into our agenda. So this is how this is going to flow today. The first part of this is going to be a lot of concepts. There's a decent amount of material. I'll try to make it engaging, and there's some slides that have a lot of text. I won't talk to all the text, but I have it up there so you can take a screenshot, or when we send this deck out later, you can have that materials. For example, when I cover the framework, there's a lot of text. It's for a later reference. In those concepts, I'm going to talk about background and context. We'll talk about history. We'll talk about the framework structure, implementation, certification, and I'm going to dive into typical timeline and efforts so you can see like a nice Gantt chart, what that would look like and who should be involved. And then I want to give you a little bit of application to close. So I pulled a customer example, a real world customer example, and we're going to dive into some of this and show you how it's playing out in the real world so you can have that. I think a good place to start is just a quick history of why ISO 42001 has become a thing because it is relatively new. And I think really that starts 2022 and before, because what we saw are an uptick in other frameworks like ISO 27001, SOC 2, ISO 27701, being security and privacy frameworks. GDPR kind of changed the world. That's a privacy regulation out of the EU. The US followed suit with state level privacy and security regulations, notably CPRA. And the reason that matters is because what that normalized was a couple of things. One, there was a high level framework and terminology for a lot of these things that was established. It also normalized this whole ecosystem of third party risk management, where for your company to do business with another company, you have to prove your security program exists, that you're managing security risk, you're managing privacy risk. And as these frameworks have developed, like 42001 around AI risk management, you will see, and I'll show you this later, it borrows a lot of the terms and frameworks directly from those other security and privacy frameworks. So if you're already familiar with 27001 or GDPR, ISO 27701, a lot of this is going to feel very familiar to you guys. So that was the context. And then in November 2022, ChatGPT was released to the wild. And I would say that was kind of a inflection point in terms of everyone realized that there was something huge happening. And then, within 6 or 7 months of ChatGPT being released, there were literally thousands of AI products born. We've all been living the hype, right? But thousands of viable revenue generating products on the market. There were also other language models being developed, like Llama. Meta opened that one. And then by December, this is a pretty fast turnaround, ISO 42001 was published. So you're talking about within about a year of ChatGPT coming out, there is now an ISO standard to address AI risk management, largely due to the market proliferation of AI products hitting the market and this desire to govern and manage AI risk. So once the framework was published in December, it was another month or so before certifying bodies actually came online. So you started seeing governing bodies like IS and ANAB or UCAS out of the EU certify audit firms to be able to issue this certification. And then by July 2024, it was mid 2024, we saw the first ISO 42001 official certification go into the wild. So that's over a year now. So we're a year into companies starting to get certified. And that kind of brings us to today. What are we seeing as of July 2025? And I think the bottom line is we're just seeing a huge amount of growth across all things. So if you look at language models, there's 750,000 language models. Most of them are variants of the main ones that you know. About 10 of them own 99% of the market. We see over 70,000 AI companies. All of your companies, if you're on this webinar, are no doubt using AI tools or building AI tools. You're seeing the major tech giants like Microsoft, Amazon, Google achieving ISO 42001 certification. Anthropic, who produces Claude, achieved ISO 42001 certification. We saw Microsoft issue, as part of their vendor due diligence, their SSPA program, a requirement to do 42001 certifications, and we're seeing thousands of AI regulations and policy initiatives globally. Bottom line is just a huge amount of growth, and I really do think we're only a year into this. I would expect a lot more AI risk management talk, and specifically a lot more 42001 going to the future. We've seen very similar trends with other frameworks like ISO 27001 and 27701 and others. That kind of starts off slow as everyone gets critical mass and figures this out. And then in years 2, 3, 4, it just really explodes and becomes kind of the standard for the whole marketplace. So that's kind of what you're walking into. That's why you're all in this webinar. I think you all sense that this is a huge initiative, a growing problem. The AI risk management is important. And I think history plays that out and shows that that is true. So that's a little bit of context. And so if you're with your company, and this is what we're hearing from customers, why should we even care about ISO 42001 in particular? And why should we think about getting certified? I think there's largely 3 reasons, 2 that I'll focus in on. The number one reason, or one, I would say the number 1 and 2 reasons that we're seeing customers choose to get certification is one, is there's just this appetite to manage AI risk. They need AI governance. And what we're hearing security and AI leaders say is that we need to move fast to capitalize on AI, but we have to have a way to manage our risk. And right now, there's not a lot of terminology. There's not a lot of practices. Most companies don't have anything related to AI risk management. So they're looking for a framework to try to do that. And ISO 42001 is becoming a very popular framework to lean into to build an AI governance program. So even if you don't get certification, adopting it as a means of AI governance is something that we're seeing. On the other side of it, like why get official certifications? We're actually seeing it play out when it comes to customer trust. We're already seeing ISO 42001 be referenced in contracts. So if you want to go do business, if your customer is trying to sell into some big organization, we're seeing AI addendums. We're seeing contractual language prohibiting AI or limiting the use of AI. We're seeing contractual amendments requiring specifically 42001, like Microsoft has done. The bottom line is it's a revenue blocker for your company. For you to be able to do business with some of the businesses that you want to do business with, you're going to have to, just like security and privacy, show that you can manage your AI risk. So again, a lot of those same buying drivers, a lot of those same reasons that your leadership team might be choosing to do security or privacy is becoming true with AI. So you can kind of play those back to your leadership team and see what they say. But that is what we're hearing time and time again with our customers that are choosing to do 42001, and even our audit partners and others that are just telling us what they're hearing in the market. This tends to be the reason. All right, so that's kind of the backdrop and context. I think a lot of that hopefully was intuitive to you, but hopefully it reassures you why this is important and why you're investing your time and energy to get up to speed on 42001. So what I'd like to do now is shift gears a little bit and hop into the framework review. Then we'll talk about the certification process and the implementation process. So ISO 42001 framework, I'll cover four things here. I'm going to cover, I know a lot of you are already probably familiar with ISO 27001. So I just want to show you real quick how similar the high level framework is to 27001 and what the key differences are. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I'll talk about the governance structure of ISO 42001, the aims, the management system, the AI management system. I'll show you the 9 control objectives and 38 controls. We'll talk a little bit about those. I'm not going to go in detail of a framework review. That would take hours, but we have already done a free course that goes control by control of every aspect of the framework. So let's talk a little bit about 42001 versus ISO 27001. So 27001 is security, obviously 42001 is AI risk management. But what you will see, and these are just screenshots of the frameworks themselves, is they follow an identical high-level framework. And what I've highlighted here is that is the difference. In 27001, they use the word information security, and in 42001, they use the word AI. So the high-level framework is identical. When you get down into the controls, they're quite a bit different. But the high-level framework is almost identical, replacing the words AI and security between the two frameworks. I think it is important to point out that while 27001 is a security framework, 42001 is not an AI security framework. It is an AI risk management framework. So a lot of people get confused there. They think 42001 is about AI security. It's not. It's about AI risk management. And when I hop into the controls here in a second, you'll see what I'm talking about, how those principles are quite a bit different. But if you're already doing 27001, you have a security management system, an ISMS. It will feel very similar when you start building out your AI management system. And you can also combine them to create an integrated management system to do one harmonized audit if that's something that you want to do. But very similar conceptually. There's also common features and common stakeholders between the two frameworks. So, for example, they both have governance requirements, policy requirements, risk management requirements. There's similar types of risks. There's similar business drivers and why you would achieve the certification and why you would think about risk management. Even the audit process is very, very similar between the two frameworks. There's also common stakeholders. We'll talk about governance, but you'll see that the same type of leaders are involved in both topics. Security, privacy, and risk management teams are involved in both. Your legal team will be involved. Product and engineering is involved in both, and even your sales team, because they're probably out in the front lines receiving the requests from your customers to demonstrate these certifications. I give you all that because if you're considering creating an integrated management system between 42001 and maybe 27001, you can see that there's a lot of overlap between the teams. Now, if you're not familiar with 27001 and you're not doing it at all, don't worry. Just know that if you ever do pursue that, there's these opportunities that exist. Now, zooming in on 42001 in particular, the way ISO frameworks are structured is that there's a management system. Those are clauses 4 through 10 in a framework, and that kind of establishes the governance structure. And then beyond the management system, you have the controls. Those are like the technical things that you need to do to meet the spirit of the framework. And that's true for all ISO frameworks. For 42001, again, there's the aims, the AI management system, clauses 4 through 10, and then there's the 38 controls. The goal of the management system is basically to govern the program and to get leadership's commitment to continuous improvement. The thing I'll say about a management system is that it has to be absolutely documented. That's one of the things that I see people the traps I see people fall into when it comes to the external audit, is that there's lots of clauses and sub-clauses. You need to address all of those. And it's really about half the whole external audit. So I think it's really, really important if you actually want to achieve certification. It's also really important if you just want to align to the framework and and try to do it as a governance structure too. So that's your aims. Here's the different sections of the aims. I'll walk through these quickly, but this is one of those good screenshot opportunities. Why clauses 4 through 10? Well, in ISO, clauses 1 through 3 are mostly administrative stuff and references, so there's nothing you actually need to do. So most of the action starts in clause 4. Clause 4 defines leadership's responsibility, or really 4 and 5. I really like how ISO's structured because it always starts with context. It's like, why are you building a risk management program? You have to define that context. Clause 5 is you establishing a leadership team to run the program, to govern it. Number 6 is when you get into planning. So things like your risk assessment, your AI impact assessment. Clause 7 is, do you have the appropriate resources and awareness to even support this? So you start defining roles and responsibility. Clause 8 dives back into the how you're going to control the environment based on the risk assessment, the results of the risk assessment. Clause 9, you get into this continuous performance evaluation that shows up like doing an internal audit each year, and then the results of those internal audits going to your management team so they can continue to evaluate and improve the whole environment. And then clause 10 is actually improving it. So as you identify opportunities to improve, you take action on those. You can evidence that you're taking action on those. And also, as your company changes, maybe you acquire a company or you produce a new product, that you have evidence of this continuous improvement. So I just went through that really, really fast. We have a whole video on YouTube that we can link to. We'll do that in a follow-up email or here in the chat. So we cover the details of a management system clause by clause so that you have a better understanding of that. But for the purposes of the overview today, just know that the aims is about half the total effort. It establishes the governance of the program. It's clauses 4 through 10, and it's really essential for AI governance in general, but especially if you're going to try to achieve certification for ISO 42001. So that's the aims piece of it. And then we hop into the controls. So if you go down to the annex, there are, I think it's Annex 1 there, or Annex A. There are 9 objectives and there are 38 controls for ISO 42001. And again, they're not related to security. They have a different intent. So I'll just cover these quickly. This is a good screenshot opportunity. The thing I've tried to do here as a courtesy is in this table, if you look at that far right column, there's my notes. So ISO can tend to be wordy. In blue, I just said, hey, what are they talking about? What are they actually asking for in this particular category? First, you need to do policies. So you need, and I'll give you some examples of policies here in a minute, but do you have the right policies? Or is AI integrated into your existing policy set? So on and so forth. There's always a big policy requirement with ISO. Then it asks in A3, are you internally organized to do this? So do you have the right roles? Do you have a defined RACI? Do you have reporting structures that are correct? Do you have the right independence? So for example, some companies need to establish AI leadership, or they need to authorize the CTO to care about AI, so on and so forth. So thinking about organizational design. And then A4 is resources for AI systems. That's all about the data sources, the tools, your compute, all the technical details related to AI. You can look into the sub-controls there and you'll kind of see what they're looking for, but starts getting a little more technical. Assessing impacts of AI systems. This is the first time that you'll see an allusion to like the AI impact assessment. So one thing I'll pull out, and we're going to talk about this in more detail in a second, but ISO 42001 kind of introduces a little bit of a new concept. We've all heard of risk assessments, but 42001 has an AI system impact assessment. And the question that an AI system impact assessment tries to address is there potential impacts to individuals or groups based on how I'm using AI. So that's what that is. Now, don't worry about that. Table that for a second. I'm going to give you a specific example here in a minute. Then we get down into A6. AI systems lifecycle. So do you have a responsible and trustworthy way of doing AI? Do you have AI embedded into your SDLC? A7, data for AI systems. So that's how do you train your AI systems? Do you have data cleanliness? Do you have data bias issues? Is it a good data set based on your use case? All those types of questions. And then we do information for interested parties of AI systems. So that's like, how do you communicate important things to people who might be impacted? And again, some of these might seem abstract right now. Here in a minute, I'm going to give you a very specific example of how this plays out. But for example, let's say I'm using AI to do a credit score. Well, how do I, as an end user of that credit score, know how you arrived at that? Do you provide transparency? That might be an example of information for interested parties. And then we have acceptable use. And then A10 finally is how do you do third-party risk management? So do you integrate AI questions into contracts? Do you do your typical vendor management or third-party risk management process that you're already doing for security? Are there AI questions you should be asking? So that's a very fast overview of the framework in general. If you go to Annex B, there's implementation guidance for each control. So as you read through those 38 controls, if it seems like you just can't really interpret it, you're not actually sure what they're asking, a good place to go would be Annex B in the framework so that you can check out, some of the guidance and that ISO is providing to implement it. All right. That was a whirlwind. I apologize. Screenshot this slide. If you want more details, the right place to go is right here. We have done a clause by clause, control by control review of the entire framework. That is a lot more than what I just did. So if you're feeling right now like you need that deep dive, just go to Google, Risk 360, ISO 42001, video series, YouTube, something like that. You'll see it's a playlist on YouTube. We also have it on our website if you go to Risk 360, and we have it organized into a course. And you can check out the good work that Sawyer did, going line by line of the whole framework. It is a deep dive. All right, so that's a framework overview. So hopefully you guys are kind of situated. We talked about the background and context, why we're here. We talked about the framework overview. Hopefully you feel situated there. Now I want to talk about how to implement the framework, things to think about, and then how to actually get certified when you want to. So for the implementation process, I'm going to give you our 3-step implementation process. It's a way to bucket your thoughts on how to do an implementation. I'm going to give you a few common gaps and some key work streams. I'm going to show you what stakeholders at your company probably need to be involved and how much effort you can expect for them, just typically. And I'll give you a typical timeline. So that's what we'll cover here. The way I like to think about implementation is these 3 steps. And I think just bucketing your thoughts, it'll help you organize your work. So the first thing I usually start thinking about when we're working with clients is just the planning part of it. What is the scope of the certification? Is it the whole company? Is it just a business unit? Is it a single product? Why? What's the business drivers of even getting certified? And making sure that we understand that it's appropriately scoped. That's going to have a big impact to for your certification. So the whole planning things, all your communication plans, your status reporting, all that stuff. So do good planning. The second thing that we like to do is the current state assessment. And that's really a gap assessment against your current program to identify where you have gaps and then what you should really do about them. So we'll do a full assessment against clauses 4 through 10. We'll also do a full assessment of the 38 controls in ISO 42001, interpret them in the context of the thing you're trying to get certified in your unique company, and then come back with a game plan. Like, what should you actually do? Like, what does implementation look like in our context? And then you go implement it. You go write all the policies, you close the SDLC gaps, you do your risk assessment, you implement your AI impact assessment, methodology, all that stuff. So this is the buckets of work. So as you're doing your own project planning, or if you're working with a company like Risk 360 on implementation, this is the typical process, the phases of a project that we would follow, that you can steal and just kind of use it for yourself. And we'll hop into the prep time and some of the details. All right, so here is the common gaps, or some of the common gaps in the types of work streams that you can expect. One is governance. So you need to establish a risk council. You need a leadership team to make decisions. And sometimes that's the hardest part from an organizational change perspective, is you got to actually get the leadership team involved and get them on a meeting cadence and talking about the right things. You need to write all the policies. You need to do a risk management program. So something where you're doing a risk assessment, you're assessing the risk, and you inform the leadership team so they can do something about it. You need to do an internal audit. So that's that continuous improvement element of it, where every year an independent team comes and does the internal audit. We do a ton of those at Risk 360. You need to have a work stream dedicated to your product or your engineering team or your technology, just depending on what you're doing. So if you're implementing Copilot, let's say, that's going to be a lot different than if you're building a product to sell that is AI related. But you need to get those folks involved, and then of course you need third party risk. If you're not already assessing your third parties for AI risk, that's something you'd have to gear up for and continue to do. So again, another screenshot opportunity. We'll hop into some of these in a little bit detail, but at a high level, here's some of the key work streams. So these are lots of screenshots, a lot of good text, so you can get a sense for all these whole next slides. I kind of broke this up and gave you some of the nitty gritty of what to think about. So one of the most common questions I have is, what policies? So here they are. Here are some of the key policies that I see time and time again. You have your aims. You have a typical AI policy. You have an AI appropriate use policy. You need an AI risk management and an AI impact assessment policy that kind of defines what you're doing there. And then there's this big part of you need to integrate AI into your existing policies. So you probably already have things like data retention, SDLC, security policies, vendor management policies, data inventory, so on and so forth. Well, now those need to be updated probably to include relevant AI content. That's what we see more than like a whole separate set of AI policies. Usually you're integrating AI into your existing policy set. And then you need to think about like your risk council. Do you have an AI risk council? Well, they need probably a charter. They need to know what they're authorized to do, what the expectations are, and then, good old fashioned roles and responsibilities document so everybody knows what is expected of them. I will say this is line for line out of the framework. They don't use these words necessarily, but we carefully read the whole framework, and these are policies you need to get certified. Maybe there are others too, depending on your unique situation. But just know I'm not making this up, so to speak. This is what we're seeing in the real environment. This is what the framework requires. So maybe a screenshot here would be helpful for you guys. Next kind of big chunk of work is the AI risk management program that you're going to have to build. You probably already have a risk management program, but you're going to have to also do that for AI. I want to point you guys to another framework. It's ISO 23894. It is a whole ISO framework on AI risk management. So it gives you lots of guidance and risk sources. It's a really good document to read. It kind of brings home what risk management looks like in the context of AI. But I have done the courtesy of reading that entire document, and I think it basically looks like this workflow. It is, you have to form an information risk council, so you need some governing body to intake and deal with the risk. You have to do a risk assessment, an AI risk assessment. You need to track all the risks that you uncover in the risk assessment, like in a risk register. Then you need to prioritize those risks, so like some kind of risk ranking methodology, and then you need to go do something about them. You need to treat the risk, and it's probably the risk council that is doing that. So in a nutshell, that is what this framework describes, and you need to consider doing that. So that's a big work stream for most companies, probably going to integrate it into your existing risk management program, but just an AI overlay. The next big work stream that I'll pull out is an AI system impact assessment. So again, there's another framework that is out there, ISO 42005. It is another full framework that gives you the context and details about how to do an AI system impact assessment. I believe they have a lot of guidance. They even have a template. I don't love the template, but it is a template that tries to conceptualize some of this. I have read that whole document. We're going to go over a specific example here in a little bit in the webinar. So if you're feeling confused, we're gonna talk about that. But at a very high level, the way an AI system impact assessment works is that you have a product or service, you need to define it. Like I said earlier, if you're implementing Copilot, that's going to be very different from you're building a custom language model or a custom AI product, right? That's a different context. And so you need to define, what does that product do? Based on what that product does, you need to ask yourself, how could that impact individuals or groups? So using a chatbot is going to have a very different impact than, let's say, something that's doing an alternate credit score, which is the example we're going to talk about in a minute. It'll have a different potential impact on the individual. So you need to have a risk scoring methodology where you say, hey, this is either a low impact or a high impact, and that's how big of a deal is it. And then based on how important that potential impact is, you need to document ways that you can reduce the potential risk and impact to those individuals. So that is the purpose of an AI system impact. Your company is essentially saying, I acknowledge how this could potentially harm someone, and I'm doing something about it. And there's a formal process to identify those potential issues and resolve them on an ongoing basis. So that's 42005. That's a little bit unique. There's not really something like this in ISO 27001, for example. Next kind of big work stream that I mentioned is your AI internal audit. I think this one catches people off guard because they go through the external audit process and then their auditor says, well, you have to do an internal audit too. And you're like, wait a second, I have to do another audit? Yeah, it has to be an internal audit. It's the way that your company self-assesses itself, identifies opportunities for continuous improvement, and continues to improve and mature. Requirements for the internal audit is that the people doing the audit need to be independent. So if you're the person managing your AI management system, you can't do the internal audit. You have to be independent from the system itself. They need to be qualified. So you need someone who actually understands AI and understands 42001. Those two requirements right there typically mean you might need to outsource it. Risk 360 does a ton of internal audits just for that reason. So you might have to engage another firm to do it. It does have to be formal and documented. So you can't just say, yeah, I did an internal audit and, verbally I can tell you what we found. There needs to be a formal inspection as well as a formal report out of that. And those formal findings need to be reviewed by management. So you have to have a way to escalate that up to, like, say, your information risk council so they can do things about it, make commitments, give you resources to continuously improve. So that is why ISO requires that. I do think that there's some opportunities to have value beyond the compliance check the box. What we typically do is we use the internal audit as a way to prepare for the external audit. So it's kind of your spot check before an external audit. I also think it's a good way to hold people accountable. So if you have a lot of people inheriting new responsibilities, well, it's kind of nice to have a friendly face that's not the external auditor come in and give you a sense for how you're doing. And then again, like, you really do need to continuously improve. You guys are seeing how fast AI is moving right now. So if you're not doing something to continuously evolve and do that rapidly, well, you're just going to fall behind. And I think the internal audit, at least the way we have historically used it, has really helped to accomplish those goals. But it is a big work stream that you need to prepare for, no matter what ISO framework you're doing, but specifically for 42001 here. Last couple, and then we'll get into the certification process. I do want to throw out that AI engineering and system development lifecycle is a lot of work, but it is very context dependent. So it's almost hard for me to tell you what to expect without knowing your company. I keep using this example, but if you're implementing Copilot versus your company's using ChatGPT versus you're developing a language model versus you're using orchestration tools versus you're actually building a custom AI product, like, the way that applies to your SDLC or your technology stack or your engineering team is going to be very unique in those use cases. So that is where this framework will require some expertise and some thinking. So you're going to have to embed AI into your SDLC. You're going to have to think about, like, a common thing that I see is maybe you need to consider which language model you use for which use case. So you might use ChatGPT for this one, but you might use Claude for another, or Gemini for a different one, because they have different use cases or different privacy considerations or whatever. So that might be something important to you. I'll share an example with you here in a second where data quality and data governance is a really important part of the SDLC and embedding it. Maybe you're building AI agents and suddenly your company has 1,000 agents running around doing work, and you need a way to govern identities and access of those agents, and so on and so forth. Another screenshot opportunity. But as you can see, there are a lot of unique instances and ways that SDLC and engineering can become a challenge during certification. And in some ways, this is really where the rubber hits the road, and you need some deep expertise when it comes to implementing an AI governance strategy. The other thing I just want to throw out there is we're a year into 42001, and things are evolving incredibly fast. I mean, there are things that exist today that a year ago I hadn't even thought of. And I totally expect over the next year, the next 24 months, that to happen over and over again. So we don't even have the body of knowledge to have a set of best practices for some of these situations. It just takes some really smart people to think through the problem. And maybe there's one or two companies that are also dealing with a similar problem, and you need to think through it together and have a logical way that you're doing something. So if you're at a company and you're like, are we the only ones dealing with this? Well, I think this might be one of those unique situations where maybe you are only one of the few companies dealing with that right now, and there isn't a best practice for it, so you have to think through it. And I'm really highlighting this one because this one currently is a challenge and this takes a lot of thinking inside of organizations. So that's a big a big uplift for most companies as they're trying to get certified or implement an AI governance framework. The people you need to get involved in the types of efforts during implementation is the leadership team. So your leaders will have to be involved. They're going to have to set objectives. They're going to make commitments. They're going to have to stay plugged in. They're going to give you resources, that kind of thing. I do see the GRC teams, the security teams, the risk management teams, even the privacy teams getting plugged in. They're typically doing stuff like writing policies. They're attending the risk council meetings. They're doing risk assessments, third-party risk management. They're probably the GRC team is probably the one preparing for and fielding the audit itself. So pretty big uplift there. I just talked through products and engineering. So based on your context, there might be a differing level of effort, but they're going to be plugged into a lot of those same work streams. And you're probably going to need legal to review policies, contracts, get involved in risk council meetings, so on and so forth. So those are the types of groups inside of your organization that you need to think about from a AI governance perspective. And I know that many of you might be at a small company, and this might be like the same person for multiple groups. So just something to consider there. And then this was the other question. This is the full timeline. You can see there's a blue box around implementation. I just kind of assumed most companies, this is what I'm seeing most often. I'll say it this way. Most companies want to get this done within a calendar year. If your company wants to get this done within a calendar year, this is kind of what it looks like. It's about 6 months to do an implementation. I have seen companies do it faster. 3 months I've seen it done. I've also seen companies take a full year to do it, depending on the complexity of their program. But on average, it's probably about a 6 month timeline. You all have full-time jobs that you're also doing at the same time. So I think it's fair to give yourself 6 months. And then certification is probably another 6 months. But I'm gonna zoom in on that here in just a second and let you know how the certification process typically goes. But again, if you're just trying to kind of do some backwards planning based on very few assumptions right now, this is, I think, a good way to think about planning. Things that do impact timeline, if you're thinking about that, is obviously your current maturity. If you've never done any compliance exercise at all before, it's probably going to take you longer. If you're very well mature and you're just tacking 42,001 on, it'd be a little faster. And then the bottom line is the complexity of your organization. It depends on your AI use case, your role. Am I talking to a 100-person company or a 50,000 person company? It's going to be very different, obviously. Number of business units. At Risk360, we work with a lot of companies that have multiple business units and multiple products. So they're trying to kind of harmonize this compliance program across 4 different business units and 6 products, but they want one audit work stream. That can totally be done. We do it all the time, but it's a little more complex because there's just more people that you have to work through. So bottom line is more complex, maybe you're a little longer, less complex, maybe it'll be a little shorter, but these are some of the factors that you can consider. I'm going to go through the certification process, and then I'm going to give you a real world use case to kind of bring all of this home and give you some practical implementation guidance. So for the certification process, I'll give you the 3-step process it takes to get certified. I want to talk about selecting an accredited certifying body, give you some tips on what we're seeing during the external audits themselves, and then timeline. And then I'm going to give you just some war stories and a couple things I'm seeing go right and go wrong during the external audit. 3-step process here is planning. So again, if you're working with the external audit, do all of your planning. You got to go through your timeline, your communication plan, agree on the scope, all the things that you would do during planning with that external auditor. And then what they're going to do, and this is the same for all ISO frameworks, is that on year 1, they're going to do a stage 1 audit. Is they're kind of looking at the design of your program. The audit timeline is driven directly by the size of your scope. So there's like a secret formula that the bigger your scope, the more audit days, the smaller your scope, the less audit days. But on average for stage 1, maybe it's a day or 2 to do stage 1. They're going to do walkthroughs and interviews. They're going to look at about 20 to 25 audit artifacts. The main ones I see auditors look at is your management system, your policies, your risk assessment, and your internal audit. They're just trying to get a sense for, are you even ready for a stage 2 audit? Is your program designed effectively? Do you have the right resources to even get through this? And if you do well in the stage 1 audit and they're feeling like you're ready for it, then they'll go ahead and they'll schedule the stage 2 audit, which typically happens 30 to 45 days after the stage 1 audit. And that's the full detailed audit where they're looking at all the evidence for your different controls. They're doing interviews with the different stakeholders. There's probably 75 to 100 audit artifacts that they're looking at. It's the full-blown audit. So that is what a year one audit looks like. Again, it's the same for all ISO certifications. And then in year two, they do what's called a surveillance audit. And it's kind of like basically like something between a stage one and stage two audit. They usually look at about a third of the controls during a surveillance year. So it's a little bit lighter of an audit for two and three. And then in year four, the audit cycle starts over where you do a stage one and two audit again. It also follows the same process. If you're already doing 27,001, you can basically just integrate 42,001 into your external audit process and do an integrated audit is what you can do. So that's big picture what it looks like. This is important. I think it's helpful context in terms of selecting a certifying body. So I'm going to direct your attention to this graphic I've created on the right over here. So kind of the hierarchy at a simplified level is you have accreditation bodies. So those are like the auditors of the auditor. Common ones would be like IAS, UCAS, ANAB here in the US. They basically authorize the auditors to do certification audits. So that's the top level. You, as a customer, you won't interact with them. You may never interact with them. It's usually the certifying bodies themselves that are being audited by the accreditation bodies to be authorized. And then the next level down, you have the certification bodies themselves. Those are the auditors doing the audit. That's who you're engaging. That's who you're paying to do the audit. And then, of course, you yourself are receiving the certification at the bottom of the pyramid. And then you have companies like Risk 360, who we kind of work with both parties. So, for example, we work with certification bodies all the time, really to stay on the same page about best practices. Sometimes we'll do joint thought leadership. Maybe there's this like really unique challenge that the whole industry is trying to agree on how to deal with because we keep seeing it. So we do a bunch of that. We do talks with external audit firms. There's working groups. There's a lot of stuff that Risk 360 and myself personally are doing. But we're also consulting companies like you every day to implement the different ISO programs, to build a security program or to build an AI program to get ready for certification. The only reason I point that out is because a certification body can't do both. They have to be independent. They can't do the consulting work and also do the audit. Similarly, Risk 360 can't do the consulting work and do the audit. So you're usually working with two parties there. There has to be a level of independence. But that's kind of the stack. So the reason that context matters is you need to choose an accredited certification body. If you go to ANAB or IS or whatever, you can look those up and see who's authorized to do 42,001. They have to be independent. You know, obviously you want someone who's cost, so get multiple, who's giving you a fair cost. So get multiple quotes. Remember you get what you pay for. So if it's too cheap, maybe there's a reason. If it's too expensive, why? So get multiple quotes and see what the cost is coming back. I do think it matters their reputation for service. And I don't mean just in the, do you know the logo? I think a good question is to ask is can I speak to a bunch of your existing customers and see if they have a great reputation for treating you well? Because an audit can be a huge time sink and really make that part of your life bad, or it can be something that adds value and it goes very smooth. Also, for 42,001 in particular, I think you're looking for a company that has AI expertise. Because if you don't have AI expertise, it's going to be very difficult to have a competent auditor do the 42,001 certification audit. It'll be very frustrating. And then lastly, as you're selecting an auditor, I think it's going to be very, very common to do integrated audits. So what we're seeing is most folks are already doing other things like 27,001, like 27,701, 9,001, SOC 2, PCI, and you don't want to manage those like completely separate work streams from an external audit perspective. It's nice when an auditor can come in and just kind of do one audit and cover everything. Audit once, report many. So as you're selecting an auditor, see if they have those kind of capabilities and ask about that. If you don't know, shoot me a note. I can give you an overview of the whole ecosystem. But those are some of the things that I would be thinking about as you do that. People and efforts. So this is kind of the other side of the coin beyond implementation. What should you expect when it comes to getting certified in terms of people? It is the same group of people: leadership, GRC, risk management, product and engineering, legal. And that far right column, I just kind of give you a sense for the typical effort. So if you need to go to your leadership team and kind of sign them up for some work, what's a ballpark range you can tell them to be prepared for? Again, this is on average. If your company is really, really complex, it might be more. But leadership, probably 1 or 2 hours. They're going to be doing walkthroughs with the auditor. They might have to provide a couple pieces of documentation. GRC, security risk management, they usually have the lion's share of the effort because you're probably the person gathering all the audit evidence and sitting through all the walkthroughs. So give yourself a week or two to gather the evidence, probably a day or two for walkthroughs. Product and engineering, during the certification itself, again, they're probably doing a day or so of walkthroughs. They will have a lot of audit evidence they'll need to provide. So if they're, for example, involved in the AI system impact assessment, or if they're doing different things in the SDLC to meet the requirements, they might be the only people with the right access to provide those audit artifacts. And then lastly is legal, a lot of risk management, a lot of policy stuff, a lot of risk counsel stuff. So maybe a half day of walkthroughs and then providing the appropriate documentation there. So again, this is just very high level if you're trying to prepare yourself and socialize with your team, or if you're putting a business case together to get people ready for what to expect. This is a way to think about it. Typical timeline, I flashed this on earlier, planning, and then you go into stage one. Stage one is usually a day or two. You do that during a month. Then it's usually 30 or 45 days later. Then you'll do stage two, and then it's usually another 30 days or so before you'll have a certification in hand. So I give you this timeline because you need to plan for those breaks. So like stage one might be a day or two, but then it's going to be 30 or 45 days before you do stage two. Then there's going to be another break before they actually give you the certification and you have that certification in hand. So it's not that it takes a full 6 months of audit. It's just that the time is going to take you that long. That way, if you're making commitments to customers or leadership team, maybe give yourself some buffer based on those breaks that it will take. So things to consider there. I'm going to skip this. We talked through it. The only thing I'll highlight here is if you've never been through an audit before, just help get your stakeholders prepared. They've probably make sure they're competent. They understand the framework. They understand which walkthroughs they're going to go through. There might be some nerves. You're going to maybe spot check some of the evidence before the audit. If I'm an auditor looking at the aims, you might be surprised that they're going clause by clause by clause through that. That can feel very frustrating. So you just need to be ready for that. You also might get an auditor that is not very experienced, so be prepared to deal with that. Or you might get an auditor that's a really super expert, and you need to kind of be prepared for that. So maybe vetting the auditor the actual individual, not the audit firm, but the individual auditing you in advance might help. And then think about a communication plan. If they find stuff, you don't want to be blindsided at the end. Like basically, you're going to ask them to tell you immediately. That way you can deal with that. Auditors get stuff wrong all the time. Maybe they don't have the full context. Maybe you need to socialize some things with your team in advance. So just think about communication plan. So again, just things I want you to be thinking about headed into an external audit. What I'd like to do now is that whole first part, that is a whirlwind. That's a lot of content that I tried to give you guys to give you some concepts to think about. But the problem I ran into as I was going through the whole framework is it's very unclear how some of this actually applies, or like what does it really look like in the real world. So I'm going to give you a specific example that's kind of it's an example of a real client, but obviously I've removed the details. It's also representative of some of the things that we're seeing very, very commonly. So I'll get to as much as I can over the next 10 minutes or so, but we'll talk about governance and AI impact assessment. I'm going to talk about some of the SDLC challenges. And then in this example, this is a Lentech company. And what they do is they do alternate credit scores for the mortgage industry. So let's say that you can go to Equifax or Experian or whoever to get a traditional credit score, but there might be situations where that's not good enough, and you need to pull from all these other sources to get this alternate credit score to lend to to do mortgage lending, for example. So big banks like to work with this company just to get a different view on a person to assess whether they're credit worthy or not. And Lentech looks at vast amounts of data to do this from all different types of sources to put together a kind of a business case, or not a business case, but to put together a credit score for individuals. And their primary customers are large banks. So here's the context as we go into it. So the first thing that we did was thinking about governance. So the problem I'm seeing pretty pervasively is there's some uncertainty about how to even set up a governance structure that makes sense, because you certainly do not want to waste time, and that you don't want to get a big leadership team at a table and add no value. And you actually want it to drive some business decisions. Like you don't want this to be a compliance check the box at this level. So what we did is they already had they had an information risk council that managed other topics like security and privacy. We added AI to their information risk council, updated the charter. We asked that the information risk council was very clear about their risk appetite, because one of the things that we're seeing is companies are just willing to take risk right now, because there's a lot of opportunity. So I think we have a pretty good sense, for example, on the security side, what the scope and boundaries of risk taking are. In AI, sometimes we're surprised that leadership is really willing to just try stuff because there's a lot of opportunity on the other side. So we specifically told that to the IRC. We need you guys to be very clear about your business objectives. Do you want to move fast? And what is your risk appetite? And then we got into a sync of really high impact quarterly meetings. So there was a ton of prep that went into these quarterly meetings so that they had read aheads. The quarterly meetings themselves were high impact, lots of decision making, lots of clarity and information sharing, never boring. And we set up a Slack channel where there was really effective asynchronous communication. So we could communicate in between those quarterly meetings as we needed to. So that is what we did there. And y'all can probably copy some of those plays. Screenshot opportunity. Here's the folks that we brought into the Information Risk Council. Engineering, there was data science, which was a new ad, legal, security, risk and compliance. The data science team, based on the type of work they were doing, was a net new ad. They had not historically been part of the IRC, but due to the mass amounts of data to do non-standard credit scores, as you can imagine, we needed to do that. I want to cover this one. This is the one I really wanted to get to, is the AI system impact assessment. So when we walked into this company, they were totally unsure what an AI system impact should look like practically. Again, they had no tolerance to slow things down. Like, they didn't want to go through this compliance check the box where they couldn't get a new feature into the production environment because of an AI system impact assessment. And they also needed to be really on point about what were actual risks that needed something done about them. So what we did is we kind of came up with this practical AI system impact assessment process, which I'll share with you in a second. And then we created these triggers in Jira that when certain thresholds were met, that we would consider doing an AI system impact assessment, because by no means did we need to do it all the time. But let's say a new data set was being used, or a new kind of factor for giving credit scoring was going to be considered, or a new market was going to be, we're entering a new market. Those types of things might trigger an AI system impact assessment. So we had to think through that stuff. This is a screenshot opportunity for you if you want. But again, it follows that same AI system impact assessment. What does my product do? How could it impact individuals or groups? How big of a deal is it? And then how can we reduce that impact? So going through that process, one of the things that we realized was some of the potential consequences was discrimination. And actually, in our case, found out that they were accidentally discriminating, or there was some bias built into the data for certain populations. And so they didn't want to do that. Obviously, that's unethical, and that was not their intent. So they didn't want to discriminate against racial minorities or immigrants or low-income individuals, so on and so forth, and end up having their credit denied, even in situations where they were in fact credit worthy, but because of other factors that were hidden in the data, maybe there was a denial decision. So they had to figure out ways of how do you do that? Because when you're looking at unfathomable size of data, and there's so many different factors that AI might be taking into consideration, some of which you don't even know that AI is taking that into consideration and producing these false negatives and denials. So that was one of the things that came out of the AI system impact assessment that was mission critical for them. That kind of segues us into this next one. So what did they choose to do about it? So they had to look for their data source. They basically had to build both front end and back end tools into their platform to deal with data sources, quality control checks, review flags, and transparency. So here's some examples of their platform. This is not obviously real. These are just examples of what they did. But on the front end, for example, they started making transparent to the end user how the score was arrived at and what factors drove that score, and giving the end user a way to dispute that. And they felt that would be more, that would give each individual a lot of transparency and fairness and ability to dispute potential issues. And then on the back end, they built this whole data science model where they could look for anomalies. So if there was some kind of bias built into the data that was past a certain standard deviation based on their hundreds of checks, the system itself would flag and give them an opportunity to review the anomaly. So obviously this is a fairly complex situation, but your company might need both front end and back end checks to do AI governance appropriately based on your specific use case. And that's an example of how SDLC got involved, or engineering got involved based on an AI system impact assessment. Last thing I'll just throw out there, I know we're really tight on time, is you need to build uh, AI into your third-party risk management process to achieve 42001. Things I'm seeing be done is just add just like you're already doing for security, probably add AI to your third-party risk management process, whatever that looks like for you. You're probably going to have to do vendor assessments. You're probably going to have to ask your vendors questions and set criteria. I'm seeing AI get added into contractual language. So, based on what you're doing and your different vendors, you might have to think about how what that contract language look like. We'll link you guys some example contract language we're seeing. And even if you need your vendors, you're probably already making your vendors get SOC 2 or ISO 27001, so on and so forth. Does 42001 need to be one of those requirements for your vendors downstream? So just things to consider for your organization. Two resources. So screenshot opportunity. Here's just some questions you can throw into your third-party risk management questionnaire or assessment process if you would like. I'm definitely not going to cover these, but you're welcome to take a screenshot here. And then lastly, here's the courses I talked about. There's the 42001 course. That is a free course. It is a lot of the same material I covered here, but broken out into little 5 to 6 minute micro courses. You can share that with your team if you want them to have something like this, but in a little bit more detail. And I talked about Sawyer's deep dive. So those are the two resources.
First question here, Christian. Have you seen organizations choosing a particular AI authoritative source like ISO over others? And are they focusing more on security, use, fairness, etc.?
Yeah, so there are several authoritative sources or emerging authoritative sources for AI risk management. So I'm just going to throw out some framework names for you. So I already gave you a couple during the course of this presentation. Obviously, 42001 is a very popular one. I think it's a good basis for thinking about AI risk management. The added bonus is that you can achieve certification. It is currently, I would say, maybe one, probably the only option really. I think HITrust also has if you've ever heard of HITrust, they also have an AI kind of certification add-on. But absent that, ISO 42001, I think, is the only framework that you can actually get certified against, and it certainly has the most traction. It is the default standard. I know SOC 2. Actually, I have a whole separate talk on that. Go to YouTube and look up Risk 360 SOC 2 plus AI. Kim can link it. We talk about how to add AI to your SOC 2 report, so that would be an option, but there's no authoritative guidance. And then obviously there's NIST risk management, AI risk management framework. I think that's also a great framework. It provides a lot of good guidance. It's just not something you get certified against, so it has that downside. There's also a lot of academic institutions. MIT put something out, Stanford put something out, Georgia Tech. There's many, many others that are putting out thinking models and guidance related to AI risk management. But those are some of the popular ones I'm seeing right now.
Is 42001 already the de facto framework for AI at this point, based on what you're hearing from customers and advising them?
I have not seen anything else. It is the only certification that I have seen at this point. I haven't seen anyone get anything else. I haven't seen anyone use anything else to communicate their AI risk management strategy to their customers or stakeholders. I don't think it'll stay that way. I think other things will get traction, but I mean, I think it is the default. And the other reason I think that is Microsoft is 42001 certified. They're requiring their downstream suppliers to get 42001 in their security third-party risk management process. Amazon's 42001, Google's 42001, Anthropic, who's the second biggest language model, maybe after OpenAI, their model Claude is ISO 42001 certified. So there's a number of really big players that are already adopting, and I'm not seeing anything else get so much traction. So my thinking is this is the best place to start. It's probably the default for now.
How is ISO 42001 keeping up with the rapidly evolving AI world? We are now seeing the rise of agentic AI. So will ISO 42001 still apply as the data risks and privacy concerns evolve?
I think ISO frameworks are written at a high enough level that they have broad applicability. They rarely dive into specific tactics. So that's both a strength and a weakness. So it's a strength in the sense that it can be applied in many use cases, a weakness in that it's not very prescriptive. So I do think that it's going to continue to apply. And I mentioned earlier, like based on what your company does, it could have totally different applicability. You're really going to have to do some deep thinking on how to apply it. Using my credit score example here, that's a lot different than if you're using ChatGPT, for example. Those are worlds apart. And I suspect 42001, like for ISO 27001, for example, it updated in 2013, and it was almost 10 years later in 2022 when it updated. I see no world where 42001 takes 10 years to update. I suspect there's going to be a lot of rapid iterations because AI is also moving fast. So yeah, I do think 42001 will evolve quickly compared to other ISO frameworks.
Next one up is a two-part question. So, do you see more demand for ISO 42001 from European companies who may be preparing for the EU AI Act versus US companies? And the second part is, to what extent are organizations using 42001 to satisfy their AI Act obligations, at least in some part?
Yep. So the Europe and the US, I think, are two sides of the same coin. So if you look at the EU, they have a tradition of regulatory authority. So you look at GDPR, you look at the EU AI Act, NIS2, all the acts that they do. A lot of their security, privacy, AI risk management activity is driven by regulation. The enforcement is driven by regulation. So over there, the reason people would get 42001, for example, might be to begin their journey to comply with the EU AI Act. And I do think, by the way, that it is a good means to do that. You can look up on YouTube Risk 360 EU AI Act Compliance Pack, and we have a whole video that we did on that, as well as a markup of the legislation itself, for example. So that's how the EU is doing it. In the US, we have a little less regulation, and the regulation we do have is largely at the state level, or it's if you want to contract with the federal government. But most of our, for example, ISO adoption or SOC 2 adoption is because of business to business relationships. So it's like Microsoft requiring you to get a SOC 2 or ISO 42001, or your biggest customer making that requirement. So we're both doing it, but maybe for slightly different motivations. But I do think, I mean, the US is a huge market. It is huge in tech. It's a front runner in AI compared to the rest of the world. So I absolutely expect the US to be a front runner in 42001. And then the EU, for example, has a long history of ISO framework adoption. So I expect them to adopt rapidly too. So I think they'll kind of evolve in parallel, is kind of my prediction.
What's the proper approach to scope AI for 42001? Do we scope the product, the process, both?
I think it's dependent on your use case. And I don't mean that to be a cop out answer. I think you need to really, number one, think about which risk you're trying to manage. And number two, which stakeholders you're trying to earn trust with and provide assurance to. So, for example, if you're selling an AI product and your product is governed separately, it has a whole unique set of risks, it's doing a unique thing, like the credit scoring example I just did, well, the scope might be appropriately limited to that product. And you don't need to scope the whole company because maybe your company is not broadly adopting AI, so it's less relevant to you as a company. Whereas other companies might not have any AI products at all, but you're very innovative internally, so you're building internal agents and you're using Copilot and ChatGPT and you have AI creep and you're using orchestration engines to send invoices and to manage HR processes and so on and so forth. Well, in that case, it's not your product that's the risk, it's you're trying to manage the risk at your company level. And both of those things can be true. So I think the way to think about scope is through the filter of what stakeholders are you trying to communicate to and what risk are you trying to manage, and then limit your scope in that way.
Kind of a second part to that question, pulling on that thread, can we leverage vendor certification if the AI components are provided slash managed via that vendor?
I think you can't. So yes and no. Yes, you can always use your vendor's AI risk management to support your own AI risk management program, similar to security. Like you want them to be managing AI risk, right? Of course you do. However, no, you can't use your vendor's ISO 42001 certification and claim that you are certified to a customer. So I would say there's like the shared responsibility matrix that you have, whereas like you want them to be handling their business, but you also need to be handling your business as well. So it's important that they have an AI risk management program, but you don't inherit it fully, if that makes sense. And Andy, let's take one more question, and then I'm going to close it out with you guys.
Is there a conflict of interest for anyone adhering to ISO 42001 certification if they are using Full Circle?
No. There shouldn't be. So just for so if y'all don't know, so Risk 360, we provide advisory services. We also have a platform called Full Circle that some companies manage their AI, they manage their compliance program of. So we can do all that. We're just not going to be your certification auditor. If we decided to also be your certification auditor, I do think that there's a conflict of interest there. So we wouldn't do that. But as long as we're operating in a platform and an advisory capacity, independent from your certification body, we're well within our right to do that. Totally fine. That's common across the industry. Thanks, guys. We'll see you.